It's the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 28, looking at the groups and teams of the 2024 Copa America. This episode is looking at the players of Uruguay. Here we go! Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and we continue Series 28 on the groups and players of the 2024 Copa America. This episode covers Uruguay's players and is in fact part 2 of the Players Media Cast. Here we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to that, part 1, in the show notes. Part 2 here, this episode, will be divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we'll take a quick look at their preliminary squad and their warm-up games. In section 2, the main part of the media cast, we look over the list that we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. And in section 3, we summarize the surprises in the selections and review injuries. Let's begin then. So we'll take a look at the preliminary squad information. And in fact, Uruguay didn't release any preliminary squad. They just released a 26-man finals roster, which they put out on June 8th. So there we have 26 players with no cuts and no cuts because there's no preliminary squad, and no late replacements either. So just the list of 26. Let's take a look at their warm-up games. We have 2 games. Actually, these were 2 to 3 weeks before the tournament, so played quite early there. The first one was against Costa Rica on May 31st. We're not really interested in the scores, but I might as well tell you that was a draw. And the second game was a 4-0 win over Mexico on June 5th. Mexico looked like they put out a B team for that one. So those, especially the May 31st one, were put out before the squad was selected. And it definitely looks like that was a B or even C team. I don't recognize even some of the names some of the players' names for that squad against Costa Rica. So it looks like he was just looking at potential candidates for the squad, most of whom didn't get chosen. We'll meet some in section 2 here. The second one maybe gives a hint as to their starting lineup. And we will take a look at it as we go through each of the positions to see who played in it. Okay, that is section 1. Let's move on to the main part of the media cast here and go over the list that we created in part 1. So manager Marcelo Bielsa is still there. We'll consider him as having been selected. And move on to goalkeeper. So we have 3 likely candidates here: Sergio Rocher, Santiago Mele, and Franco Israel. All 3 of them were selected. So those are the 3 keepers. No surprises there. And our possible candidate, Randall Rodriguez, was not selected, of course. And the player playing in the first game was Rodriguez, so obviously they gave him a tryout and decided on the 3 likely players. In the second warm-up game, it was Rocher, Sergio Rocher, so that gives us a hint of what we already thought, that he would be the starter. So just kind of strengthens our resolve that, or our opinion that Sergio Rocher is the starter there. Let's move on to central defense. And we had a definite candidate in Sebastian Cáceres, who was selected. A likely candidate, Ronald Araujo, also selected. Jose Maria Jimenez, we had him as a possible candidate based on his participation. Given he's the captain and his history with the team, we thought he was probably more than possible, but we left him there. Anyway, he is selected. However, the The second possible candidate, Bruno Mendes, was not selected. We have a bit of a surprise here. We had two possible but unlikely candidates, Santiago Bueno and Nicolas Marical. Of the two, I actually thought Bueno would be selected if either of them were, but it was Nicolas Marical who was selected for the squad. And Sebastian Coates not selected. He was seemingly off the squad, but I kind of wondered why he wasn't being called up. Anyway, I still wonder. That is central defense. Let's see who started. So in the first game, again, I don't recognize any of the names. I actually have a long list of players who have some association with the squad over the last couple of years, and the two players are not even on that list. So just seems like players brought in completely out of the cold and not selected for the squad, so we won't even mention them. In the second warm-up game, though, it is Jimenez and Matthias Oliveira, the left back. So that's a bit of a surprise. It doesn't really... it isn't what we think will be in the starting lineup. We were definitely expecting Sebastian Cáceres, but we're a little uncertain about whether his partner would be Araujo or Jimenez. Again, Jimenez didn't play much leading. Anyway, I won't get into it. So that doesn't look like the selection. Certainly not left back Oliveira. So we're a bit confused by that, but there we have it. Let's move on to left backs. And here we had two likely candidates in Matthias Viña and Matthias Oliveira, who we just saw started as a central defender. Both of those were selected for the squad. And we had two possible candidates in Joaquim Piquerez and Lucas Olaza. And here Lucas Olaza was chosen and Piquerez was not. So three left backs chosen. And yes, with just four central defenders chosen, they are a little thin back there. So maybe it's not a surprise that they're trying out Oliveira as maybe a backup for the central defense position. Anyway, since he was playing backup, we have Olaza playing as the left back. So again, we would have expected Matthias Viña if it was the A team, but it looks like he's trying out some players in different roles there. So maybe giving Olaza some experience on the field. Okay, let's go over to the right back position, and here we had a likely candidate in Nathan Nandez, who was selected for the squad, and a possible candidate in Guillermo Varela, also selected. And those are the only two, the only two selections over here. And in the warm-up game, it was Nandez starting. So that is who we expect to start in the tournament as well. Okay, moving on to defensive and central midfielders. We had a definite candidate in defensive midfielder, Manuel Ugarte. And that's all we had for defensive midfielders. Well, we had two possible but unlikely candidates, and one of them made it. So I don't know why I said that's all we have. I apologize. Emiliano Martes was the first possible candidate, possible but unlikely candidate, and he was selected. So a bit of a surprise there, because we also have the central midfielders to choose from for this position. The second possible but unlikely, Nicolas Fonseca, was not selected. And when we look at the central midfielders, we have a likely candidate in Rodrigo Bentancur, who was selected for the squad, and a possible candidate in Felipe Carvalho, who was not selected. So that's all we have, three defensive / central midfielders. Again, that's a little bit thin. I'm when we look at the warm-up games, we see the two players. We definitely expected Ugarte to be selected, and Bentancur started alongside him. So that may be what happens in the cup, but we hadn't tagged Bentancur as an expected starter when we did part one of the mediacast. I've been ignoring the squad for the first game against Costa Rica there. In all the positions I've mentioned so far, I don't recognize any of the names. None of them came up in part one. Even on, we had some players kind of seemingly off the squad that we didn't even present in part one, and they're not even among those players. So just really players maybe from the under 23 or under 20 team or something. I'm not sure what they were doing. Obviously looking for new talent. Okay, let's move on to left midfielders. We had this category because Uruguay sometimes uses a 4-3-3 formation. By the way, they didn't in the warm-up games. It was a 4-4-2 formation, which they rarely use, but again, they're using players that they rarely use. The second match was a 4-2-3-1 formation. Again, not something that they use that much. Anyway, let's move on to the left midfielders. No definite candidates there, but we have Nicolas de la Cruz as a likely candidate, and he was selected. And we had possible candidate Matthias Vecino, who was not selected for the squad. And it seems after the squad was released, actually on May 24th, so before the squad was released, he announced his retirement from the national team. So it's hard to say whether that is because he wasn't selected for the squad, or perhaps he was announcing ahead of time that he wouldn't be available for selection, since he made this announcement on May 24th and the final squad came out on June 8th. But whichever it is, Matthias Vecino not selected for the squad and has announced his retirement from the national team. Moving on to right midfielders, we have a definite candidate in Federico Valverde, and he was selected for the squad, and that's all we have over here. So he is a player we expected to start, and he was not selected, or sorry, he was not part of the warm-up game, either one of them. Nevertheless, I still expect him to start in the cup. Okay, we move on to left attacking midfielders, and here we have a likely candidate in Maximiliano Araujo, and he was selected. And we had three possible candidates. Sorry. The first one, Brian Rodriguez, was selected. So was the second one, Christian Oliveira. But the third one, Facundo Torres, no room for him, so he was not selected. They already have three players over here. We expect Araujo to be the starter in the cup, and he was the one who started the warm-up game. So that at least was as expected. Over to the right attacking side of the field, we have Facundo Palestri as a definite candidate over here. He was selected, and we had Agustin Canobio as a likely candidate. He too was selected. And we have a third candidate over here. It's not one of our possible but unlikely candidates, neither of whom were selected. That was Luciano Rodriguez and Ignacio La Quintana. They weren't selected. We have instead Brian Ocampo brought into the squad. So actually, he's not a new player. We had to dig deep into the bowels of the soccer files to find him, but we do have a kind of a file on him, as it were. So I'll introduce him. He is 25 years old and has one cap for the national team since 2021. He plays for Cadiz in Spain since 2022, and he was part of the Copa America 2021 squad, just a substitute in that tournament. But in that tournament, he was touted as a very promising young player. That didn't seem to work out because he didn't really make it on the squad and was not selected for the World Cup in 2022. He actually was on the big 55-man preliminary squad for the World Cup in 2022, but didn't make the tournament. So he seemed to be off the team, having last appeared on the bench in September 2022, Brian Ocampo, until surprisingly named to the final squad here. And here he is, Brian Ocampo, our new candidate. However, he was not used in the first warm-up game. So again, we are still dealing with completely unfamiliar names there. And in the warm-up game, it was Palistri, the player that we expect to be the starter there. Okay, move on to central attackers here. And for candidates, we had the likely Georgian Diarra, and he was selected for the squad. And that's really all we had for candidates here. It was not he who started in the central midfield, though. It was our right attacker, Brian Rodriguez, getting the start there. So maybe that indicates what will happen in the Cup. We're not sure about that one because we didn't see Brian Rodriguez as a starter. Okay, on to the forwards. Definite candidate, Darwin Nunez was selected. And possible candidate, Luis Suarez, was also selected. The other possible candidate, Federico Viñas, I think he would have been selected. However, he was an injury doubt, and that injury hasn't changed. He was out with an Achilles tendon rupture since late May. Well, we'll talk about that in section 3. Anyway, he was not selected. Because he was just a possible candidate, we're not really sure if the selection is due to injury. In other words, would he have been selected had he not been injured? We're not really sure. But anyway, not part of the squad here. And that's all we have for forward. So while Luis Suarez did make the squad, retired candidate Edinson Cavani was not brought back for the tournament as some people hoped he would be. And he too announced his retirement from the national team. Again, not really sure if that happened before the final selection was known or after. It was in May, so it might have been before, but I'm guessing the players would have been told before the squad was officially released. So one way or the other. And that's too bad, actually. I was kind of hoping Cavani would be brought back to the squad. I didn't want my lasting memory of him to be what happened in the World Cup against Ghana, a desperate dive running into the box and then arguing with the referee after the match that it was a valid penalty shout. There are other Uruguay players who, I remember in that light, but Cavani, I thought he was kind of a bit classier. So too bad about that. Anyway, Edinson Cavani had not been really a consideration. He didn't play in any of the games since the World Cup. Okay, that is it for the forwards. We only have to look at the warm-up squad for that one, and we see that not only did Darwin Nunez start as expected, but he scored 3 of the goals. So a hat-trick there against Mexico's B team. A good thing to go into the Cup on. Again, though, more than about 2.5 weeks before the tournament. So those players are going in, let's say, well rested anyway. Let's go on to section 3, where we review the surprises and injuries. So, no notable non-selections in as far as our likely and definite candidates go. All of those were selected, but for notable non-selections, really, we look at the players who have basically retired from the team. So it is significant the amount of players they have lost from their not golden generation, but a strong generation. First of all, Edinson Cavani will not be at the tournament. Diego Godin, these are all huge names for Uruguay. Ferdinando Muslera, the goalkeeper. Martin Cáceres, the left back, sometimes versatile defender. And then not so much from the golden generation. I was a little surprised Sebastian Coates was not really a consideration during this period. People more intimate with Uruguay may know the ins and outs of it, but from the kind of overhead view that I have, a little bit surprising. Although he's never really fully integrated into the squad. Lucas Torreira may be in the same boat there. Not sure. And then we have Matthias Vecino, who announced his retirement from the squad, just like Edinson Cavani, both of them doing that in May. And as I said in section 2, we're not sure if that was maybe a reaction to them hearing about the final squad and not being selected, or whether it was an announcement that they didn't wish to be selected for the squad. Anyway, both of those officially retiring. Surprise inclusions, we have 2 players who were possible but unlikely according to us, but who were selected. The first one is central defender Nicolas Marechal, and the second one defensive midfielder Emiliano Martinez. Both of those players will probably be on the bench, but nevertheless surprise selections. And then we only have one new player who's not actually new, just new in the sense that he hadn't made the radar for part 1 for us because he hadn't played since September 2022. But Brian Ocampo brought in to the squad, surprisingly. Okay, let's take a look at the injuries then. So we had, excuse me for a second. We had known about Federico Viñas, the forward, who we considered just at the possible level. I personally think that he would have been a selection, even though he was just at the possible level. And perhaps Luis Suarez was brought in because of Venus's injury. Anyway, out with an Achilles tendons rupture since late May. He missed the last 2 club games of the season and had an unknown return date. We speculated in part 1 because that injury is quite a serious one and happened in late May, that he wouldn't recover in time. But again, we're not sure if that was the case or whether he just simply wasn't selected. Anyway, Federico Viñas not part of the squad here. And that is it for Uruguay, just the one injury problem. So that brings us to the end of our media cast here. I'm just going to set up the graphics so that they look nice when I say farewell. Okay, that is it. So we will see you. We will see you in the cup. We would like to thank Paul Udin and Pixabay for the wonderful background music accompanying this media cast. The piece is called Victory Epic Music.